Hi Emily, Amy here with the feedback you requested on your campaign analysis blog, Rough Draft. Overall, I do think that you are in pretty good shape. However, I also have some suggestions for how you could tighten it up just a little bit, and I can hopefully relate those to the various categories that are on the rubric here. So I'll definitely try to talk about the depth of your analysis, which I think is pretty strong. The evaluation that you present in that kind of delayed thesis at the end, which I think right now is a little disjointed, the overall organization, and the accuracy. You'll have to send me your blog link again so I can get to this actual post, and then I can give you some feedback on the genre conventions and how you're executing those. Okay, so let's just jump into your actual draft here. You've done all this correctly. You obviously know how to do MLA formatting at this point, so that's great for the Word document version that you upload to the Dropbox for your final draft. Jumping into your essay here, this series of questions at the beginning of your introduction does a pretty good job hooking the audience's interest. Normally I would tell a writer you kind of want to shy away from repetitive use of second-person pronouns like you, like you're doing here, because that can sometimes alienate the reader if they don't feel like they identify with what you're saying or what you're tying that pronoun to. However, in this case, you're kind of asking these questions and making that point of view violation a purposeful choice to get the audience's attention at the point in your introduction where you would normally do what we would call a hook. And then the way you transition that into your introduction of the advertisement itself works. So I don't think it's really a problem here. Where it does become a problem is later in your introduction when you're summarizing the ad and you give more of the repetitive use of second-person pronouns here. At this point in the introduction, you're no longer in the hook phase. You're no longer in your point of the paragraph where you want to be getting the audience's attention, and so it's not really a necessary choice to make, and it actually can be really alienating to the reader if they don't see themselves as viewing the ad like you're saying they do here. So if they've never seen the ad, what you're saying here actually wouldn't make sense, and so that can make them feel kind of pushed away from what you're saying in the essay. And then the other problem is that the reader may not even actually be part of the audience for this ad, and so if that's the case, then the ad is definitely not giving your reader a glimpse into the future. It's giving some other audience a glimpse into the future. So in general, it's just a better idea to talk about the ad's effects in terms of the audience, not in terms of you talking directly to your reader in second person. So I would just replace this with the audience. It shows the audience for that brief moment what their life would be like should they decide to use meth and that kind of thing. Okay, then you go into your discussion of pathos, which is very well developed. Overall, this is a good topic sentence. You do say strategies, emotions, audience, emotional appeal. You don't actually say the word pathos, but I can pick up on the fact that that's what you're talking about. This is a really strong paragraph because you introduce the main idea in your topic sentence like that, and then you actually go on to provide a lot of really good examples of visual strategies, verbal strategies, and different features of the text that kind of convey the rhetorical effect that you had introduced in the topic sentence. So that's really that well-structured paragraph I was talking about in my feedback on the discussion last week, where you want to have your topic sentence and then fill up the paragraph with examples, and you're doing a great job of that here. The only thing I would suggest for this particular paragraph is that you probably do want to add another sentence at the end of the paragraph just to kind of restate the point that you had introduced in the beginning that you're making throughout the paragraph and kind of connect it all together there at the end. Even though you're still talking about pathos in the next paragraph as well, you are shifting to a different point about the pathological appeals of the ad, and so wrapping up your point in this paragraph with an additional sentence here would just kind of tie everything together and help it make a little more sense for your reader and convey the relevance of the examples you provided earlier in the paragraph as well. And then going into the next paragraph, you have another good introductory topic sentence. You're transitioning. I can follow the logic of how you're getting from this paragraph to this paragraph, especially with how you're explaining it in these couple of sentences here. What I find problematic in this paragraph is that you're providing maybe an overabundance of examples and listing the examples in a way that makes it almost sound more summary heavy than actual analysis. So, you know, the paragraph starts out similar to the previous paragraph where you introduce the rhetorical appeal at the beginning and then go into some of those good examples of how the rhetorical appeal is being achieved. But then those become kind of burdensome when it's just one thing after another from the ad with less interpretation of the effects. So for example, his clothing is soiled, surrounded by filth, the girl's not smiling, she's oblivious, her hair's greasy, she looks old for her age, she's shaking. You know, maybe it's just that some of this summary needs to be condensed, or some of the examples need to be conveyed a little bit more briefly, because you do talk about some of the effects here, fear, pity, and the reality already created. But then again, there's more summary here, and the discussion is strong. It's just, again, I wish you could get through those summary examples maybe a little more quickly, or maybe you just don't need as many examples. And then that was also problematic because of the balance between your discussion of pathos and the other rhetorical appeals like ethos and logos. It's not even necessarily that this is too much, but it's so much more than you have for the other rhetorical appeals that it almost feels like you're overcompensating with the extensive use of examples here. So maybe just pick your most effective examples for pathos to get this point across and cut the others, and then go into your ethos and logos paragraphs and add more examples to beef those points up a little bit and add more of a balance between your discussion of each appeal, and that would really make it more of a consistently strong discussion throughout the essay, as opposed to a really strong discussion of pathos, a relatively good discussion of ethos, and a developing discussion of logos. So you do have another good topic sentence here. You do have several good examples, although as I mentioned, not quite as many as you had for your previous points about pathos. Normally I try to stay away from editing kinds of comments, but you had so few grammatical punctuation kinds of concerns that I just want to briefly mention one here. You're not using a colon correctly, and I actually suspect that you want to use a kind of complicated punctuation mark called an M dash. A semicolon would also be somewhat appropriate, but you would actually need two. You'd need one here and one here, and it's usually not conventional to have more than one semicolon within one sentence, or even a paragraph for that matter. But what you can use is what's called an M dash, and it's kind of like an extra wide hyphen, but it's not a hyphen, it's a dash, which is a subtle difference. But what you can do in Microsoft Word is just type 2 dashes there, and when you get to the end of the word, if you hit a space, it will automatically connect them to this kind of extra wide dash, which is called an M dash because it's the width of an M as opposed to the width of an N. So that's just like a really nitpicky grammar rule there. So you can do it again here. And whereas it would look kind of weird to use two semicolons, the M dash works just like a semicolon, but you can actually use two because it's kind of setting this part of the sentence off from the rest, and so it actually makes sense to have two. Although you actually do not need to have two, you could also just end the sentence right there if you wanted to. But I do like the M dash because it is such a versatile punctuation mark. Okay. Going right along back to the substance of your discussion, I also think it would help, like I said, for your first pathos paragraph to have just something, another sentence or two at the end of your ethos paragraph here to kind of tie your examples that you've been making in the previous sentences back to your overall point that you're trying to support in this paragraph about ethos in general. So just kind of another sentence or two to wrap up. And then, as I kind of alluded to before, your logic discussion is probably the weakest of the three different types of appeals. Even starting with the topic sentence, it's not nearly as eloquent or in-depth or substantial as the topic sentences for the previous three paragraphs, and I suspect that maybe that's because you were struggling to write this paragraph a little bit more. So in your revision, maybe go back and, you know, instead of just saying the logic is there, you know, model it more after what you've done in the previous paragraphs. you know, something like, you know, this ad does provide a subtle, or however you want to describe it, use of logic to appeal to the audience, or something a little more substantial, as I said, than what you have here. And then you can make this part its own sentence, because I think that could use some development. You know, you might even need more than one sentence to get across what you're trying to say here. I think it becomes a little bit more clear when we get down to your discussion of the supplementary text, which does in fact connect to your logic discussion. You're even saying the word logic here near the topic sentence. You're talking about the age of the target audience, which is exactly what you're talking about up here in your previous logic paragraph, appealing to the audience in a specific age range. So I think what you need to do is take the bulk of this paragraph discussing your supplementary text and just move it up to maybe, let's see, here, I would say, where you're discussing age range previously, excuse me. Okay, and then we can cut this comment and see what it does. Okay, so if you had a more substantial topic sentence, you would then go into talking about the ad's appeal to an audience in a specific age range, and then you can say on a simple level, this looks great. But you know, and it is successful in connecting emotionally and portraying ethics, but a deeper look at the logic uncovers one major flaw. Then go into your discussion of the supplementary text, and that will tie that supplementary text back to your point about logos here a lot more effectively. And it is totally okay to have two kind of with the grain points about the effective use of pathos and ethos, and then have a kind of alternative discussion of some of the flaws in the logic of the ad, and still make an overall evaluation that it was successful in general. That is perfectly fine to do. You just might maybe want to kind of transition into this paragraph by saying something like, you know, despite the strong use of pathos and ethos, there were some flaws in the logic, and then you can go into exactly what you're saying here. And then once you've cut that out the way I just did, I think these two paragraphs that you have left, or this little short paragraph and the few sentences from the end of that supplementary paragraph, or excuse me, supplementary text paragraph, those can go together to actually create a pretty strong conclusion paragraph. I would just put them together in one unit as opposed to two separate. And then let me delete these comments and see how that will look. Whoops. You'd be saying, you know, the use of pathos is astonishing, the appeal to ethos is subtle. As for logos, it does make sense, but maybe not successful for the particular age group. However, that said, I ultimately believe that although the strategy used to attract adolescents is flawed, the overall rhetoric is successful. You know, that's your good evaluation right there, and it is a delayed thesis the way you're recapping everything and tying it all together, even though it is maybe a little bit longer than we would normally expect a thesis to be at. Well, no, it's still, yeah, so it's 4 sentences. You might want to condense that down to maybe 2 or 3 if you could, but overall you're doing what the assignment asks you to do. And then I had also mentioned that you could beef up that logos paragraph a little bit, but I think if you bring your supplementary text discussion into your logic paragraph, that's going to be a much more substantial discussion regardless. I just think if you kind of have this as an in-depth discussion of logic, you have your ethos relatively well developed as well, maybe cutting back on just a few of these examples in the pathos discussion will balance it out a little bit more, as I've said before. And then overall you did a really good job with your works cited. Just make sure it starts down at the top of the next page. This part here is part of the title. It can be italicized as well, and this page number should actually be moved to after the year, and page numbers are always preceded by a colon. And then when you have a print source, you actually don't need to include the access date. The access date is just there for web sources because the content changes and you want to know exactly like what date you were looking at, what version of it. Okay, so that's pretty much my overall feedback. Like I said, you are in good shape, but in terms of like your organization and presenting that delayed thesis as in one comprehensive conclusion, there's just a few tweaks you could have there and balancing the discussion in terms of all the appeals that you're talking about. But if you want to send me your blog link or you want further feedback, please just let me know. Okay, thank you.